All right, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning. How are you today? This is a special lecture. It's not out of your textbook. So for those of you who haven't been following along necessarily with all the other lectures, you will find me probably more boring than you expect, unfortunately, in this format. No, I hope not. But in all seriousness, this is a little different style. We're not going to be going through questions. I just want to tell you about a man. A man who gave all. But the man who, and if you followed along, this is the fourth time I'm going to say this, but this one might be the most appropriate of all of them, to be real honest. The man without whom the revolution in our country wouldn't exist. You won't find his name in a lot of textbooks, and to be honest, I'm not sure why. I've wondered this question, I've asked this question, and nobody seems to quite know. But his name is Robert Morris. Robert Morris, the financier of the revolution, the banker of the revolution, the economist of the revolution. You can call him those names. Generally, he's known as the financier of the revolution. Some of his tremendous accomplishments. He was from Philadelphia. He got into commerce there, working in the shipyards and shipping, and worked his way up really very rapidly in the shipping, and became part of a commercial shipping or banking, and the two were tied together at that time firm that he owned with a couple other individuals. This shipping firm, and you purchase shares and they own several ships, but you purchase shares in a ship and it's commerce. You send it overseas and it comes back. It comes back and you sell them the produce. And your money, you have ideas of like checks or letters of credit, and your credit is then valuable if you are a reputable dealer. Some of his major accomplishments was he was the Philadelphia passed a law for the gradual abolition of slavery at his lead. In 1786, Washington wrote to Morris about ending slavery, and it led Morris to fund the initial Underground Railroad. You're going to hear a lot about money here, and that's because Robert Morris was immensely wealthy. A modern comparison might be Charles and David Koch, the Koch brothers, or George Soros, individuals who have founded groups to fight for their political beliefs or ideology. Another example, actually, Bill Gates, who has funded a desire to end malaria and has actually saved millions of lives doing so. He was immensely wealthy. Through his international trade, he became extremely wealthy, and he became a bank in and of himself. And people could trust, hey, if this letter says that they will pay you, it's a letter of credit from Morris and such firm, then they knew, like his shipping firm, you knew it was good. And once again, if you own a ship, let's say you put grain on it, and you send the grain over to England, and you sell the grain there in England, and then you bring back that ship, and you bring back from England, let's say you bring back goats. All right, so you bring back goats from England, and then you sell the goats there in America. Then to others, you are the supplier. You are supplying on one side and the other, and you send ships back and forth. Now you can buy. Some people might own their own ship, and you could buy a share, 25% of the cargo, the sales proceeds of that shipping endeavor. Now, if the ship was sunk, you lost everything. Or it was captured or destroyed or whatever. So it's a bit of somewhat of a higher risk venture. But this is how shipping was the way that most of the wealth, a great deal of the wealth there in the early Americas was gained, especially by someone like John Hancock and Roger Morris. During the war, Roger Morris had a fleet of somewhere around 2,000 ships. All right, and he gave 100 or so of his ships, at least, and possibly, directly to the U.S. Navy, and 1,900 other ships for use of the colonists. He personally supplied the entire America, the colonies, with their navy. He owned several thousand ships that he had bought and purchased through his trading and making, and then using those ships to make more money. He used his extensive trade network for intelligence. Remember, he had contacts and connections all over, and so he used that for intelligence. He designed the system to smuggle supplies for the revolution a year before it started. He was vital in supplying and working the infrastructure in the financial sector. To put it one way, he could consider him the Federal Reserve of the revolution. Okay, just as there was a bailout for Wall Street and a bailout for for the auto industry, and the Federal Reserve bailed out in 2009, 2010 when the stock market was crashing. So Roger Morris bailed out the state of Pennsylvania when they went broke by self-imposing too many regulations. They imposed too many regulations and tariffs and stuff, and they went bankrupt. And he bailed them out, paid their bills, and reopened the ports through his own personal accounts. Roger Morris voted against the he was in the constitutional the Continental Congress. He voted against the Declaration of Independence. This is fascinating. He designed the system to smuggle supplies a year before the war, voted against the Declaration of Independence. The following day, both he and John Dickerson voted against it. The following day, and when they voted again, he abstained, as well as John Dickerson, abstained. He gave a vote of abstention, which allowed that the vote for the Declaration of Independence to be published, to make it unanimous. I believe it was 11 or 12-0. All right? His vote in favor of abstention of Declaration of Independence was considered the most vital vote in the process. Without it, it would not have went through. Okay? It's the most pivotal in the process. All right? Partly because without it, Pennsylvania would not have been able to join, and the colonies would have been split in half. But also because he was he was clearly probably the most wealthy man in the colonies, and his influence and power and shipping and was abundant. I can't compare him to a modern day corporation, but if you imagine for a second Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google combined into one shipping firm, that might be sort of like Roger Morris, what his shipping firm he was worth. All right. After voting against the Declaration of Independence, he then signed it. Fascinating man. He didn't think it was the greatest idea, but he said something along the lines of, "Who am I to? If I want people to listen when I speak, who am I to speak when? Who am I to not listen when others have spoken?" I mentioned he funded the initial founding of the Underground Railroad, thanks to some correspondence between him and George Washington. During the war, as you may have realized or may not have realized, wars take money. The soldiers in the Continental Congress were paid very low, but they were paid. We weren't at times. They printed paper money saying, "Hey, this has value," but it wasn't backed by anything. And people, if you don't think that you're going to lose the war, you don't believe that the Continental Congress has the power to actually fulfill that money becomes worthless. So who backed Continental Congress? Who funded and who paid the soldiers? Roger Morris did. Never asked for any money back. He's the one who paid the army. He's the one who bought the supplies. He personally contributed, somewhere around $16 billion, and I don't believe that is I don't believe that's exact modern terms. It is very likely that he basically out of his back pocket funded the entire revolution. All right, and when I say the entire, I don't mean every single penny or every single bullet. Although 90% of the bullets of the war and 95% of all other expenses were funded by Roger Morris. the king said, when saying the Declaration of Independence, it didn't say it wasn't John Hancock's name, big signature, that upset him. He said that Morris's name signed on the Declaration of War was the worst name of all. Okay, that was the most upsetting of him. Okay, they use a different word there, but we'll leave that. During the war, he lost over 1,000 ships. Personally, his fleet, he lost over 1,000 ships. He had 2,000 or so ships in his personal fleet in the war effort. Some of his other contributions. He fought against religious freedom laws and fought for religious freedom, and eventually got the Quakers and the Jews and the Mennonites able to vote in the state of Pennsylvania. In 1781, the Continental Congress was bankrupt. The United States was bankrupt, and they were in debt, a large debt, and they don't have any money to pay their soldiers. Their soldiers need paid. There's a war fighting. The soldiers are like, hey, you can't pay us, we're going to go home. So what did he do? Took out his wallet and paid it. Let me repeat that. He paid the entire debt of the U.S. government in 1781. If only someone could pay off our national debt today. He gave his personal home as a presidential mansion to George Washington. And George Washington accepted it and paid rent to the city of Philadelphia for something like $1 a year or something to show that there was no signs of impropriety. But basically, he gave his personal home that he had spent considerable time building, etc. He gave it to George Washington as the presidential, and for up close to a decade until the White House itself was built, it became his presidential mansion. Okay, that was Washington's. Roger Morris eventually had some other stuff in work, and he eventually, at the end of the war, and when they were voting, there was a real question over who would be the first leader of our nation. The two names, there was only two possibilities, by all accounts. George Washington was the people's favorite, but the other name that was mentioned was Roger Morris. Roger Morris nominated George Washington for president, and that ended all discussion over who could be, because he was the only other person being considered to be the president of the United States. Roger Morris eventually actually died as not a wealthy man, partly because his debts were not paid, because he gave so much away to the Continental Congress, partly because of a severe economic crash, partly because he made a very large investment and someone embezzled. There was a lot of crime that happened, and he lost, and then he ended up, it was an investment that was leveraged, and because it collapsed. But so eventually he died not a wealthy man, but it was only the last 4 or 5 years of his life that really was an issue. For about 1896 to about 1804 is where he had in his last few years of his life, a little bit of financial problems. But from about 1772 to about 1796 or so, he funded and bankrolled basically the revolution. And his name is not one that's often talked about, but it is, I think George Washington probably would have pointed to him as the individual who, without him, he couldn't have accomplished what he did. Sometimes, during the Continental Congress, by the way, he was the quartermaster of Washington's army. When they were going to go to Yorktown and fight and force the British to surrender, they couldn't do it until Morris paid for Morris, and then one of his contacts that he worked with paid for Washington's troops so they could go down to Yorktown, and forced them to surrender. During the war, he provided several roles. Basically, and I'm trying to remember the exact names here, but he could consider him like the head of the treasurer, the chief economist of the Continental Congress, and he ran the administrative part, the administration part of the Continental Congress, not the diplomatic part necessarily, or the correspondence part, but the actual economic and foreign affairs and of economics and trade and currency and the treasury, and making sure everybody got paid, and making sure they were making smart investments, and and making sure the troops were fed and they had guns and bullets and all that. He was the man who was responsible for that. He was the organizational genius behind the Continental Congress, and it was his own personal wealth that he gave away, his own personal navy that that he used for shipping, that he used. Roger Morse, one of the unsung heroes, but without him, again, this is the fourth individual I said the revolution would not have happened without. Samuel Adams, George Washington. Okay, I'm trying to remember all the people I said here, but Samuel Adams, George Washington, Roger Morse, several people. Without these people, we would not have a nation. Thank you. Have a great day.